All right, we are live, and since we're live, I'm going to look weirdly at my own picture on the on the live stream. All right, ready, steady, and goey. Welcome to Australian Transformers League. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that again. Welcome to Australian Transformers Weekly. We're bringing you Transformers news from around the world with Australian accents, and this week we will be talking about the new Netflix series. It's going to be a spoiler-filled discussion. So if you haven't watched War for Cybertron on Netflix, you've got about 20 seconds while the opening credits to the podcast run to go and do it. All that coming up after this. All right, welcome to the show. I am Jason, coming to you from Sydney. We have joining us this week to discuss the 6 episodes that have dropped on Netflix just late this week. Actually, we have Daria coming to us from Canberra. How are you going, Daria? It's been a while since we've seen you on.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Bit colder I am, but those watching the video can see I've got my hat and my scarf and things on, but we're doing good.
Canberra is regularly about I believe like 5 to somewhere between 10 degrees colder than Sydney. What temperature have you got there tonight?
3.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Like 10 to 15 degrees. But yeah, wow. Oh, that's bloody cold. Max, how are you doing over there in Adelaide? What's the temperature there?
It's currently 13 degrees. So
I love the fact that we all know the temperature where we are. This is great. This is going well.
You just got to keep abreast of these things. No, so I'm enjoying just wearing my t-shirt while Daria can freeze to death over in Canberra.
I've gone in the middle. I've got myself a long sleeve t-shirt on for the discussion. I don't know.
What temperature is it with you where you are, Jason?
It is
a real good question.
It's about 12. About 12. It's actually it might be a little bit higher than that actually, but Sydney had an absolutely stunning day today. In fact, it's 14 according to my phone. So 12, 13, 14. Google's location's always slightly off. It doesn't necessarily know exactly where I am. It thinks I'm a couple of suburbs over. So, there we go. I'm trying to figure out if Max is frozen. No.
I was frozen for a second.
Indeed.
Yeah. Sorry, my thing was just lagging, so I changed it to connection.
All right. It's good. We do this live, and look, it didn't actually drop you out of the show. So yeah.
For once.
All right. Yeah. So let's get right into it. Okay. So the much anticipated, whether feared or welcomed, new Transformers show, War for Cybertron Part 1, Siege, named just like the toy line from last year, has finally dropped on Netflix. It was slightly delayed. It was meant to premiere a couple of months ago, but here we go. July 30 came around. We had a little bit of a little gathering at my place to consume all 6 episodes on Thursday night. We gathered round and socially distanced ourselves in front of the television. So when I say little gathering, it was a little gathering. And yeah, so we consumed all 6 episodes. How have you guys consumed them? Did you watch them all in one sitting or space it out a bit?
Oh yeah, I touched binged it on Thursday night.
Yeah.
Yeah, just blasted through it all last night.
Excellent. All right.
And that's the only way to watch anything that's on Netflix.
Well, so it's a slightly shorter show than I would have anticipated for. I think it's been about 2 years we've been hearing that it's in production, because I think we heard that it was coming to Netflix when they announced that Siege was going to be the first upcoming wave of the War for Cybertron line, and then nothing happened last year, and now this year we're well into Earthrise and we're getting Siege, which does echo what happened with the Machinima series. Yeah. And after all of that, only getting 6 episodes, although they're 25-minute episodes, so they're more traditional style episode lengths rather than the 10 minutes or so we got for Machinima series. I keep calling to mind Machinima because there's a lot of the same people working on this show than as those who worked on the Machinima series. Production has been taken over by Rooster Teeth because Machinima's gone. They acquired most of their assets though, and the executive producer FJ DeSanto is the same guy who I kind of dislike the fact that he's been named a Transformers veteran for working on 2 of the Machinima series. But
For working on 2 of the most maligned Transformers series too.
Yeah, no, like if you're gonna call someone a veteran, then like the only person that I think should actually be a veteran is probably one of the comic book writers. Like someone like Simon Furman, like him or hate him. He's probably one of the few people who actually earns the right to be called a veteran. You know what? Michael Bay might earn the right to be called a Transformers veteran because he's worked on the show on the thing for like 10 years.
Well, maybe you have to you'd have to call him a veteran then, because like I feel like the rite of passage for Transformers is, will the fans relentlessly dunk on whatever you've created? And the answer is yes. So you could probably call him a veteran in that sense.
Yeah.
Stop previewing the rest of the show, Max. in which we relentlessly dunk on War for Cybertron.
I was more talking about the Prime Wars trilogy.
No, that's fair enough too.
Got better things to say here.
So let's talk about War for Cybertron. Really, really, really quick. Take a pulse of the room. Give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Daria,
up.
2 thumbs up. 2 thumbs up. Max, 1 thumb up.
One.
I'll give it a thumb.
Enthusiastic one.
Yeah, no, I'll give it a thumb up as well. I think it brought a little bit of happiness to the world. It frustrated in a number of ways, but I think by and large, there were more positives than negatives in the show.
Yeah, that's where I am, and I went with, did I enjoy it or not? Yes, I did. So that gets the thumbs. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. I'm not going to say there's no problems or there's nothing I didn't like about it, but I didn't sit there at the end going, that's 2.5 hours of my life I'm not going to get back. So yeah, win.
And that was the last Michael Bay film. 3.5 hours you're never going to get back, right?
Well, only 2 for me because I slept through 1.5 hours and didn't really notice.
Very good. So look, we've got a few bullet points to talk about as we sort of take a whistle stop tour around the series. 6 episodes. Did it feel long enough or too short?
Earlier on, it felt long enough. Like the first couple episodes were really nicely paced. And like right from the get-go, that was one of the things that stood out to me above the Prime Wars trilogy was the pacing felt a lot more natural. And it carried that way basically through the entire series until you get to episode 6. And for a series which I actually quite liked, 6 just felt like them throwing everything at the wall all at once. And what was quite reasonably paced, just all of a sudden they're going to wrap up everything at once and you can't keep a track of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if
that's been criticised. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't know if they needed a 7th episode or if they just needed to draw some stuff back out of 6 into like 5 or 4, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a lot of the stuff in 6 was, we've got to move these characters between locations, and we've also got to introduce these new characters, etc. And it's kind of just, you're right when you say it is the sort of stuff where it could easily have just been shifted earlier, so you got time to actually process what's going on.
So I have a slightly different take on this. So our group, while we were watching the show, one of the things that came out of the production is that everyone spoke really slowly.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. It wasn't the story pacing I didn't find slow, but especially the first episode I found literally slow. Speaking and moving, and I think the latter they were trying to go with, these are gigantic metal beings, they move slowly, they're such colossuses. But when you're dealing with Transformers, you don't work with that because the Transformers are the people characters, so as far as we're concerned they should just move normally. And I noticed a trend, and I don't know if this was indicating anything or just a coincidence. It seems that the longer a character had been, the older a character was, like in terms of the franchise, had been how much they've been used. That they seem to be the slower ones, because you watch Optimus Prime talking to Elita 1, and he's talking slow and moving slow, and Elita's almost talking like a regular person. Well, because she's got fewer Elita 1 baggage to live up to?
Possibly. I guess where I was going with that was in terms of number of episodes. I found the delivery of lines often quite self-indulgent, and I felt like the show just needed a script editor to tighten things up, and then maybe 6 episodes might not have felt like such a rush. I think there's a lot of wasted time in a lot of the earlier episodes with sort of panning back and forth and characters talking to each other instead of doing things. I found that the battles I thought the battles were pretty good. There was a bit of carnage and the things. There's lots of explosions, lots of smoke that sort of went around. All the explosions and the smoke was pretty well animated. But I just felt that if they'd tightened up some of the things that took a long time in the show, a lot of the things that took a long time didn't need to take such a long time. Like someone would mention a concept or something, and another person would then refer to that concept in the next sentence, and it's like people don't speak that way. People will acknowledge what you've said without necessarily repeating it, unless you're one of those people who's done some coaching to try to gain empathy with people. If you're a hostage negotiator, perhaps you might.
There's a whole bunch of active listening coaches on Cybertron.
No, I think there's a whole bunch of active listening coaches on the writing team, and I think they've sort of lost the art of actually writing dialogue that flows properly. This is actually something that we saw happen in the Machinima series as well, and I think really what part of the problem is probably that they probably didn't have the voice talent actually recording next to each other in the studio. They probably recorded them separately.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Doesn't seem like a big budget production in the same sense as a lot of other animated things would be. So, I mean, obviously we don't know that for certain, but
well, we do know that pretty well, because we know that it wasn't a union production, because we know that Welker and Cullen were not involved because it wasn't a union production. If it was actually a union production, they would have been able to get the two of them.
Okay, there we go.
I guess I mentioned that just in terms of budget. I think speaking in terms of budget, they got Polygon back to do the animation. Polygon was last seen doing. I think they did. Well, so they definitely did Transformers Prime. Was Polygon actually involved in RID 2015? I have a feeling they actually were.
I'm not sure.
We'd have to check that. It's a very different animation style. But what do you think of the design, the characters, the setting? There's a lot of sort of debris and destroyed environments hanging around on Cybertron, and the characters themselves look quite lived in. We've got a picture of Bumblebee up on screen at the moment, and the texturing on him is really impressive. It actually, I remember several points during the show looking at the characters and thinking that the show actually looks like a Livio Ramondelli comic come to life. There's so much texturing on these characters. What did you think of the look of, first of all, the characters, and then second of all, the environments?
I thought the animation was just Detroit. That's probably the biggest standout thing from the show for me. Is it's just it's visually pleasing to look at and watch. Not just the action sequences, where I thought where they struggled a lot in Prime Wars, they were really nicely done here, and it flowed well. The visual effects were nice, but like you referred to, just the art style of everything. For something that is just basically G1, there was this quality to it that I can't really put my finger on. It probably is just the darkness and the texturing of it, but it's got this real dark, it's a dark visual tone, but it doesn't feel overbearing. It doesn't feel like they're trying to, make it feel all morose and grimy and edgy. It just feels like it feels real. It feels like a lived-in world.
I feel like I understand what you're getting at by saying it feels like a lived-in world, but so on one of the shots we've got on screen here is I think this was actually one of the shots during the virus that that Megatron was using to knock out the Autobot systems. The problem that I end up with thinking about this as a lived-in world is like you can see that city go as oft into the distance as far as the eye can see, but we still only have like 10 or 15 characters. And so where are all of the Transformers making their way around these cities? Like there are lights on those buildings, even though as I look at the building in the foreground, I can see the repeating texture of the lights as you look down the building. But that's fine. This was a split-second shot. You see these kinds of cheats in all sorts of animation. It's funny when it's still when it's right in front of you. But this is one of the big problems that I have with the show is that these cities look like they've been lived in, but they look like they're empty now, even though all the lights are still on. Is that something that you've noticed too, Daria?
I got it a bit both ways. I mean, it's an ongoing problem with CGI at the moment that it takes resources, money to make characters, and so there's far fewer than the story would suggest. There are some parts though where I thought the lack of characters lent to the idea of how screwed up Cybertron, or at least a part of Cybertron where In was. It's a lot of portrayals of Cybertron. It doesn't look any different in wartime or peacetime or nothing time. This looks like it's actively getting blown up and messed up, and no one's having time to fix anything up because they're too busy dying or trying to make other robots die. But yeah, there is a lot of sort of telling us this is a big planet-wide war, and there's, especially because there's not sort of a throwaway line of, it comes down to we half a dozen Autobots, Decepticons right here, right now. So you do end up with this where is everybody thing, even when you're in the fields of repaints, which is its own issue. And
let's talk about
how that works.
Let's talk about repaints as well. So I think the only characters that didn't see a repaint were Optimus, Megatron, and Jetfire. Everyone else copped a repaint, several of them, and in some cases it lent itself into sort of how Netflix has presented repaints in the toy line, and the others, the repaints that we've got in the toy line are completely absent from the screen. They're obviously working with a few base models and sort of duplicating them and changing their colors, which the group that I watched it with on Thursday, we sort of led that to sort of say to us that Transformers tend to come off an assembly line, and so they might share body types. That doesn't necessarily make them related, but you might have a sports car Transformer that ends up painted red and becomes Sideswipe, or you might have one that ends up painted blue and does something else. He might end up being a Decepticon. There's definite reuse of body types between and across. I think there are cross factions as well, but I can't necessarily tell. But one of the scenes in Ratchet's med bay, there were 3 blue Sideswipes in the one pan across shot. And so we are dealing with a decent number of sort of base models for them to work with. Like there's what do we got? There's a Seeker, there's Hound, there's Sideswipe, there's Mirage,
there's a lot of cogs.
There's Refractor. There's a lot of cogs. Although I think most of the cogs were on the Autobot side, actually, weren't they?
I don't actually recall seeing any on any of them cross factions.
Maybe you're right. So Refractor, I think all the Refractors that we saw were definitely on the Decepticon side. They were sort of the army troops. There's definitely no Autobot seekers, but I guess with Sideswipe I can't really tell. But yeah, maybe it is less about them sort of rolling off an assembly line and choosing a faction. But even so,
well, they talked about the Autobots and Decepticons as races within the show, which makes you think like it could be a predetermined thing, which is not something we've really seen before. You know, like Jetfire explicitly says that to kill the Autobots is the genocide of a race, not wiping out an enemy faction.
And Starscream gets in on that by saying even if we convert their programming to our cause, they're not going to be real Decepticons. They're going to they're going to pollute the
he talks about
gene
like
pool.
a eugenics type of thing.
Yeah.
I have a question that I want to put to you about this. Is that just someone who's seeing what's going on in the world around us at the moment, trying to make their cartoon show seem topical and possibly not really understanding the nuances of what they're writing about? Because it seems a bit clumsy, and it seems like it's just sort of shoving in race in there as a reason to talk about sort of differences between these guys when they're clearly the same race on this planet, but maybe just not understanding, you know, how they should really discuss it.
Yeah, well, especially considering that they reference the backstory of the IDW Decepticons and that universe within this show, but and they turn it into a fundamentally. They base the conflict in the show off of these conflicting ideologies about how the world should operate. But then they sort of throw that out the window and say, oh, actually, it's a race thing now. Right?
Yeah, that's why I think it's...
they're different, as opposed to they want to kill each other because they think differently.
Yeah,
that's why I think it's a bit clumsy.
Yeah, they've touched on it in some other media before, but they've never really discussed it as a racial divide in those words. I think the closest we've had is talk of genetics in Regeneration 1. And in fact, that had a similar thing, that you could use external means to switch someone from Autobot to Decepticon. So,
I think in Energon, they did that explicitly too, but Energon was awful. So you can't I really want to make that comparison.
Even apart from its awfulness, it's hard to tell what they're talking about most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So whereas this is overall, I do like the show, but it has these weird little aspects like that.
So it is interesting. It is one of the central plot points that Megatron desires to find the Allspark, the sort of core of all life on Cybertron. In order to win his war with the Autobots, he's going to use the Allspark to forcibly reformat all of the remaining Autobots as Decepticons. Which of course means that the Autobots need to find the Allspark so that they can control it, and that doesn't happen, and thus plot and conflict occurs. And I feel like ultimately, if you sort of take a 50-foot view of the show, ultimately it became a hunt, or it became a quest show, which sort of it ended up fairly straightforward. After umming and ahhing with each other for a while, the Autobots went to the Sea of Rust, found the Allspark, and then sent it off-world via a space bridge that they had found. And I think we had sort of assumed that they would carry it off-world with the on board the Ark, but instead, nope, they chucked it through the portal and now have to go and get it. Now, like considering it was 6 episodes on that, there's quite a few diversions along the way. As someone in our group called it, we had Mad Max Cybertron Road along the way as everyone went into the Sea of Rust. it literally was like Mad Max, and of course we had the presence of certain characters drew cheers about the room. And I gotta say, the presence of this one character drew a massive cheer in the room and a few "oh my god" moments. We had Sound Blaster as well. What a surprise that Sound Blaster turned up in the show.
What a surprise that Sound Blaster had more of an active role than all these other characters that sort of, but major characters that sort of get relegated to a side appearance too. I mean, I'm not complaining. It was just a bit funny.
Yeah. It seemed funny. I'm pretty sure he was only there for the one episode because at the start of episode 6 they were escaping from Sound Blaster's lair with an arm full of energon. But yeah, the other character that I think had the greatest impact on things in the show was probably Ratchet, and considering that no one was able to locate. I say no one, but considering that a lot of people were unable to locate Siege Ratchet, and Ratchet has now been such a major component of this show, I feel like there's going to be a lot of people looking for him. There might be a lot of people settling for the Earthrise version of him instead of the Siege version. But also, it strikes me that Ratchet, out of everyone in the show, is the only one who actually has a clue how to make Cybertron work between the Autobots and the Decepticons. He goes out, he picks up anyone who's damaged off the battlefield, and he fixes them up with the caveat that they have to help him fix others, whether they're Autobots or Decepticons. And I thought that was a really good spin on the character. I do think there were certain characters who actually did get good spins on them in the show. Ratchet was one, and I actually really liked what they ended up doing with Bumblebee's character as well. They gave him an interesting backstory because he was an energon scavenger instead of an Autobot, and he was an unwilling Autobot as well. Which also is funny, as we mentioned earlier, the design of the characters. I will just point out at this point that they made such a big deal out of using the CAD designs for the toys, but then one of their major characters did not have a toy. And so Bumblebee is not really based on Cliffjumper. He does not look a thing like the Cliffjumper toy from Earthrise. So he's their own character.
And neither did Cliffjumper, if I recall correctly. So Cliffjumper, despite having a toy in Earthrise, was literally just a recolor of Bumblebee here.
Which is kind of I've been thinking about this, right? So we don't know what Bumblebee looks like in Siege because there's no Bumblebee Siege toy. When Bumblebee arrives in the Netflix line, he's an Earth-based, VW-based figure. So essentially that makes Bumblebee Earthrise. We don't know what Bumblebee looks like in Siege, which means we also don't really know what Cliffjumper looks like in Siege on his Cybertronian mode. So the fact that they're both technically off-model is kind of okay. I thought Cliffjumper would end up being Bumblebee's brother or something, but no. Go on, Max.
And I think there were a couple of others, like, RC was one, but I think there's a pattern of it was just the characters who are only present in Earthrise and not Siege were the ones that they didn't use the CAD models for. So,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
While we are still sort of, we've talked a little bit about design, but and we've sort of moved on to a couple of plot points. But let's just come back to design for me because again, I've got Bumblebee up on screen there. Let's talk about mouths and lips, and also let's not just talk about mouths and lips, but let's talk about shaky, wobbly waistlines. Optimus Prime's hips don't lie, after all. And so, what did you guys make of some of the choices that they made in terms of animating mouths and animating other body parts?
I felt like I could deal with the stuff around the waist specifically. Like, obviously, if a joint isn't there on the toy, then you make it work on the animation model. But it wasn't so much that there were joints moving where there weren't on the toy itself. It was that there's this huge exaggerated motions on the hips of every single character.
Yeah, I will say I thought it was more noticeable with Prime though, and to a lesser extent Megatron later in the show, but mostly Prime was the one that it was just really, really obvious. It was like as Prime was walking along, like there was like just textures compressing and stuff. It felt as if they'd taken a rotoscope of an actor walking and applied it to their Prime model, and hadn't really they hadn't really paid too much attention to what it did. They just were like, "Yep, right, that guy's animated and he's walking in that scene and it's done."
Yeah, I think they were going for swagger because they did it so much to the leader characters that they should hold themselves so, but I don't think the final result was everything they were aiming for in that regard.
No, I agree. I would have preferred to see them actually just put a little bit of effort into actually just maybe making some panels move around the waist. It doesn't matter if it's not in the CAD model. Like you do have the freedom as animators to just modify the model a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. I did find it. I pointed this out way back when the first trailer came up, but I found it weird that they'd followed the CAD models so closely that the weapons ports and 5mm pegs were still on the characters. Someone in the Facebook discussion group actually said that maybe we'll see a part of the show where like some either blast effects or some weapons sort of come into play with those ports, and maybe there'll be a reason for them. No, there wasn't. Although there was a weaponizer gimmick with COG that they used several times. But I thought, look, I found things weird about the way that they animated some of the characters. Some of them were fine. I had this thought during the week when I saw a photo that Sixo put up of Earthrise Scorponok with a couple of other figures in front of him, and I thought, oh, you know what? That is the kind of thing that we've always sort of expected when we're looking at our toys and when we're playing with our toys. In our heads, we've seen these big articulated characters and they're able to pull off pose and stuff. And then I looked at the show again and I thought, that's kind of what they're trying to give us. Like they are trying to give us an animation of the toys that we have.
It felt like Unicron trilogy animation, but done well. Energon stuff.
Energon especially
had. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say Energon especially had this case of them using CAD models of the toys, but this is a similar thing done 15 to 20 years later. Excuse me, probably closer to 15 years later, and with better textures and done by a different animation studio. But like it feels to me like they really tried their best to actually give us an animated tale of the toys that we can go into the shop and buy. Daria.
Yeah, I was just going to footnote the Unicron trilogy went so far as to a couple of characters even had their screws from the toys visible on screen.
Yeah, that Unicron trilogy. Yeah, good on you guys.
I also wonder if it's exactly as you said, that they wanted to give an adventure in the toys, and they thought if we veer too much from this, then the further we go from that, the further it is from these guys being the toys you can buy.
Yeah, I mean that's always been one of the things going back to G1 is that the characters on screen look nothing like the toys. I feel like animated was one of the first times you could actually say that they really tried hard to copy the on-screen appearance. And I say that because that felt to me like they'd animated the figures and then come up with toys based on it. Whereas with Energon, they obviously had the CAD model for the toys and just based the animation on it.
Well, animated they did, and I'm not sure if they've done this before or since, they actually worked on both at once together.
Yes.
They said, we want to put this in the toy. Can you put this into animation? Well, okay, we can't do this, but can you do it this way? Okay, we can put that on our one. And they'd feed back and forth. And I don't imagine there's been no collaboration since, but that was basically the first, from what I gather, and maybe the most. Let's really work together so these things look as much like each other as possible and still look good.
I feel like in the intervening years, the ability to actually animate complicated models on screen has evolved to the point where they can actually go, oh, you know what? Just make your toy and give us the CAD models and we'll make it work. Which, for the most part, they did. I mentioned Ratchet being one of the sort of big characters and being hard to come by, there's a little bit of remorse going around the community this weekend, I think, from people who did not pick up Jetfire last year, because Jetfire is now really hard to come by. And after having such a major role in the series, he's now sort of a toy that is on people's want lists.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think I'd be there too if I weren't so attached to my classics Jetfire, who presses all my Jetfire buttons for me. I actually like his design better than any of his subsequent incarnations, including the Commander class one. I think there's a bit of because classics, the original line actually called classics, has kind of disappeared into the ether a bit now, and Jetfire's had certainly bigger ones since then that's also been a bit forgotten, but it doesn't have stuff like the rotating symbol gimmick and things, but it's got pretty much his jet mode. It's got his armor. You can even put his little helmet on if you want. So yeah, I think it's underrated, that figure, and I'm not getting the regret of not getting recent Jetfire, but I can see why lots of people would be, because that was a pretty cool figure nonetheless.
Yeah, no, he was probably one of the best figures of last year. But given that he was last year's figure and now he's featured prominently in the show this year, it's a bit of a shame. Still,
sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I say that's the ongoing thing. You talked about it before, that they're kind of bringing all these shows out a year late. So this, if you watch this and go, oh, I want that Impactor guy, and I want a Prime that looks like that with the big lights on top, and I want this looking, I want the Seekers that look like this, and I want that big chunky Jetfire. They're all last year's model, literally. So
I mean, I guess the advantage here is that there are always re-releases coming out, like the Netflix line, and then Takara is also doing a lot of stuff.
Very good point.
So Takara did announce this week that they are reissuing Siege Ratchet. Now, I say Takara is reissuing. I suspect that they never. Oh, actually, you know, I think they did actually do Ratchet last year. I think some people did actually get Takara Ratchets last year, but Takara's announced that they're redoing Ratchet. So if you did miss out on a Siege Ratchet, I believe he'll end up a Takara Tomy Mall exclusive. You can order him through, and there's a number of ways. You can use sites like Buy, or I personally prefer to use Treasure Japan. They're nice and easy. You can email them and ask questions, and they answer, and it's lovely, and they're lovely and polite. If you're after any of the Takara Tomy Mall figures, there's a bunch of services that you can use to get them.
I do think they could stand to manage their lead time a bit better, or try to, so we're not having to have these conversations, and the toys on screen and the toys on shelves are better overlapping.
Well, so this actually does bring up an interesting question. Do you think it will be 12 months until we see the Earthrise animation, or do you think it might arrive sooner?
Safely said, I've got no idea.
I think I'd say sooner, but someone threw a pandemic, so that knocks everything for a loop. I know that for Power of the Primes, the last segment was much closer on the heels than the previous one had been. And I'd wonder if that would happen again. But because at least some of this is going to, a lot of this is stuff you can do with people working in their home labs or in their home studios or whatever. But it's still going to, I imagine, be a practical issue trying to make it as easily than when you have a literal animation studio at your beck and call.
I do think the major hurdle in production of the next one is actually just going to be the animation side of things, which perhaps Polygon's animators are working from home. We don't really know. The voice actors, I don't think they've got them together in a room for this one, so they probably won't for the next one, because, like I said, someone threw a pandemic. So, you can still get someone to go into a recording studio and have producers and voice coaches there and handle things for them. I would actually be really interested to see speaking of voice cast, we might sort of segue into some of the discussions of voices and acting. But I'd be interested to see whether or not the situation might change production wise for the second chapters, and maybe they will end up as sort of a more union based production, and they might bring in Cullen. They did have Peter Cullen in chapters 2 and 3 of the Prime Wars trilogy, although they didn't have Welker. They had in part 1 they had John Bailey doing Peter Cullen impression, and I know you want to talk about Peter Cullen impressions, Dario. So we might segue into that. But here we had I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, whether it's Fouché or Fouche, J Fouche, whatever his surname is. I don't really know. He might not come back in the next part. We'll see. Doing a very obvious Cullen gruff Cullen style voice for Optimus Prime. Now, Daria, you want to, I'm going to hand the floor to you. You wanted to talk about the colonization of Prime?
Well, yeah, I think this is something that's gone from a tribute to kind of a problem. And I'll lay down at the start, I'm not saying Peter Cullen is a bad actor. I'm not saying he's never done a good Prime. I'm not saying there are no good Primes left for him to do. But he of course, just in case anyone's tuning in really late, he, of course, was Optimus Prime way back in the original cartoon series in the 1980s. And he did great. And everyone loved him. And they brought him back for Michael Bay movies. And
after a lot of fan pressure, I will point out that, initially they said, no, we're not going to get Peter Cullen. He's too old and we don't think his voice is there. And there was a lot of fan pressure and they went, all right, we'll bring Cullen in. We'll have a look and see whether his voice is up to it. And then they went, yeah, okay, we'll do it. So and initially they had no intention of bringing in Cullen. They didn't bring Welker. Well, they didn't bring Welker in. Hugo Weaving did Megatron for the first few movies. And then finally, I think they brought Welker in to do Soundwave in Revenge of the Fallen. And then they finally gave Megatron to Welker in Age of Extinction.
Yeah, and I think what happened to Optimus in this process is that it's not just the acting, it is partly it is also the writing and the voice directing. Because looking broadly at the character, Optimus Prime in the original TV series, he was actually, sure, he was stern and he was commandery, but he also had like this weird, dry sense of humor and things. Like, I remember his delicate lock-picking technique and him trying to play basketball. And I think a lot of people who have written Prime since have not taken from that. They've taken from the 1986 movie. In the 1986 movie, Prime is serious and he is depressing and he is angry, but that's because of the circumstances he's in, and part of which includes him dying. So it makes sense in context there, but it often feels like that's all of what they've taken as this is Optimus Prime, and feel that everything he has to do now has to be bold or angry and most explicitly profound. There's another podcast actually keeps a running tally of Prime speeches in Transformers Prime, and that's kind of kicking into a kind of generational copying thing. So that's what happened in the 2007 movie. When it comes back again in 2010 for Transformers Prime, they look back to that and they do even more of that. And of course, there's further movies down the line. And what this is also creating is that the idea that, even though it wasn't so before, that sounding like Cullen is Optimus Prime, and no other character is really suffering from this, with the possible exception of Soundwave, who's kind of his own special case.
Let's talk about Soundwave in a minute, but yeah.
He is kind of his own special case in terms of voice acting, but almost every Optimus since, with the most outlying welcome exception of animated, has been doing Cullen light or Cullen-like. I mean, John Bailey actually did fine. I just don't think he was given great material. At least that's how I feel. And Jake Fushi in this one is doing gruff, and Optimus Prime sounds like Peter Cullen, and it's coming across like someone doing an impression of Peter Cullen and honestly, the Peter Cullen he's doing an impression of is doing an impression of himself already. and it's just coming down light. And this only affects Optimus Prime. If no one has watched this and rather, I know in this case they did because of the G1 connection, but no one's been watching the last few things and say, why isn't Dan Gilvezan playing Bumblebee? Why isn't Michael Bell always playing Sideswipe? Why isn't, and so on. Optimus Prime is the one who always keeps getting the same voice and character back. And Bumblebee just led a series sounding nothing like Dan Gilvezan, but played by Will Ferrell instead, and not betraying the character in the process, because you can keep within the same broad scope of a character, which is a question across Transformers media anyway, without having to do an impression of the guy before you. The Wheeljack and this one, he didn't have the rasp that a lot of others do, but he did have that sort of semi-clever, occasionally snarky aside thing, which made him seem like Wheeljack, even if his actual voice is different. And I think there needs to be more freedom to move with Optimus Prime, that not every iteration just has to sound like the same thing, digging further and further. And I think directing and writing is playing this. And
the fundamental issues with the fan, right? Sorry. I'm just thinking, I don't think it's an issue with writing and directing necessarily, because we see Prime in these various different iterations take on a different kind of character, right? Even within the recent iterations that have Peter Cullen within them, right? He's not the most consistent character across them. It's often just like, who's Optimus Prime? He's the guy in charge of the Autobots, and they go off from there, right? There isn't much that's consistent beyond that. And so the issue in animated and voice stuff becomes that people aren't looking for a consistent characterization of Prime. Transformers fans are looking for Prime's characterization to be, is he voiced by Peter Cullen? And if he's not voiced by Peter Cullen, then they chuck a fit over it. Right, and they write a little antsy comments and whatever, and it colors their view of an entire series because this one character doesn't sound like what he sounded like 40 years ago.
I feel like part of the problem is that when people are writing these shows, they're writing them for Cullen's voice, and they're expecting when Prime says something that they think is profound in the script, then they expect, and in their mind, they hear it in Cullen's voice. And so when they get someone to voice Prime, they want him to sound like Cullen. And I think there definitely is room to move away from that. I just don't know if you can do that in a show where Prime very obviously looks like his G1 iteration. There is sort of expected to be that connection. Prime's the most iconic character out of the franchise, and so you expect him to sound the way that he does in G1. And I think the other characters, I think there's a little bit more room to move because people don't really remember their voices so much.
I got to be honest, I could stand to cut that cord and have a G1 looking Optimus Prime start sounding different if it meant his character wasn't, as Max said, just becoming what do I think Peter Cullen sounds like.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's somewhat explainable in this because we do have a G1 Prime, and so that I expect people sort of expect it to sound like G1 Prime.
But he's also a very different kind of G1 Prime too. He's not the same. He's not really like some other G1 Primes that we've seen before, right? I actually think Daria hit the nail on the head earlier when she said that the animation Prime from G1's cartoon series was a lot more jokey, a lot more laid back, and I mean, you could get that with a more youthful Peter Cullen's voice. Like, I remember recently looking back at some of the G1 episodes, and Prime makes some really off the cuff remarks and throws in a few funny one-liners here and there, and that stuff is completely gone from the modern iterations of Prime. And yes, it is all based on the movie because that iteration of Prime, that iteration of G1 Prime, the movie Prime, has become the one that everyone follows because it's like his ultimate mode. It's his final form, right? Literally, because he dies in the movie. But so
everyone tries to get their Prime to say one shall stand, one shall fall. You know, it's always falling back on some of these lines that, you know, sort of have become the lines that we all parrot onto each other, until all are one and everything like that. And so, yeah, I think people do try to make it sound more like movie Prime than series Prime, and everyone has ever since.
In the Stasis Pod review of the movie, the '86 movie, they say, "Oh, if you didn't hear that line, don't worry, you'll pick it up many, many times over the next 30 years."
Yes, it's true. Let's move away from Prime and let's touch briefly on Soundwave. Soundwave got a visible and an audible reaction when he appeared on screen, and then very quickly had everyone go, "Oh God, what was that?" when he spoke. The computerized sort of vocoder-ish voice for Soundwave, very much aping the Soundwave that we hear in G1, but completely off the reservation. I think I did not enjoy that Soundwave voice at all. What did you guys think?
I didn't mind. Like, I've seen a lot of people get upset about it, or not necessarily upset, but just like, you know, take issue with the fact that it's a bit different. And I was like, I don't have anything really good to say about it. You know, it wasn't a particularly amazing vocal performance, but it's just Soundwave was a fairly minor role. He was there largely just to deliver exposition within the show. And it was a serviceable voice. Nothing really bad to say about it. Nothing really good to say about it. It was just, yep, that's Soundwave.
To borrow another critic's words, it was so adequate.
Was Soundwave actually voiced by someone and computerized, or was it actually a computer synthesized voice?
Oh, I didn't check.
I must admit I do not know, but I actually had I had sort of pinned it as a synthesized voice while we were watching, but I must admit I don't know.
I didn't check either, and I can't check without interrupting the feed. So
let's just go with it sounded like it was computer generated, and if Soundwave was indeed played by a human, then that is probably a I don't know, a compliment to them, maybe.
So I thought with Sound Blaster they did at least make a job of, this is someone who is stuck with a Soundwave kind of voice but isn't actually Soundwave inside. So not brilliant, but you could tell what they were doing.
So thinking back, I can't quite picture what Sound Blaster's voice was, other than the fact that I now feel like he was just a New York mob boss.
Well, yeah, you did. You kind of remember it in crime movie voices get dubbed over.
Yes. And so the lights in my room are doing weird things because I think my housemate has just frustratedly told Google to turn everything off. So sorry, I'll just turn my lights back on so that I can see things. I think by and large, a lot of us thought the voice acting was, as you so rightly put, Dara, very adequate. But I don't feel like there were any particular standouts. Does anyone feel like anyone did a particularly good job of their character?
I thought Bumblebee was getting better as he was going along. Maybe
I'll give you that. Yeah, he did. Bumblebee had probably some of the most lines of anyone in the show, actually.
And Cybertron.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry.
A later one, as I brushed on before, she did manage to sound more natural than her fellows around her.
That's true. A later one, I think several times while watching the show, I was just like, oh yeah, a later one is having none of your shit, Prime. Like, a later one, I think possibly was one of the most realistic portrayals of a Transformer. Like, there was actual nuance and emotion in her voice.
That's right where I'm going with that. Yeah.
So a later one, and perhaps Bumblebee. I thought maybe because I enjoyed his role in the show, but I thought Ratchet was quite good as well. A lot of the others just sort of seemed a bit kind of throwaway to me. I felt like Omega Supreme I could barely understand because they had so heavily processed the voice.
They could have done
Omega Supreme sounded really young too. He didn't sound like how you imagine Omega Supreme to sound. Just sound like a regular dude. Nothing particularly grandiose about him.
He did sound huge.
Yeah. It's I think that was I don't know. There's there's a few things with some of the characters that I just felt their voice didn't match up to the scale of the character nor the on-screen actions of it, and I think that's sort of indicative of them recording the voice separately to the people who are producing the animation, so they didn't necessarily understand the nuances that the voice actor had put into the voice. There is, of course, the scene early on in the show in episode 1, which attracts a lot of guffaws and controversy, which is at the suggestion that they should kill Bumblebee because he might give away the location of their base. Prime's outburst that we are not the Decepticons. A lot of people felt that seemed quite sudden and quite overacted and a bit out of character for not out of character, but a bit out of where the scene was going. So
that's give me your face, Prime. That is.
Yes, yeah, pretty much. There were just a few things where it seemed like I said, the delivery of the line didn't match up with how they'd animated it on screen, and I feel like that's somewhat indicative of the producers being unwilling to go back and redo one for the other. So,
and they really could have stood to turn down the vocal effects on a lot of the characters.
It's true. Every character had a little bit of processing to make them sound like a robot instead of just having a voice attached to the performance. Yeah.
And they've had that on and off since G1 anyway, but to me at least there was, for most of the characters anyway, there was just too much of it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So look, we've covered a lot of aspects of the production. We are actually coming up to just sort of touching an hour. Let's aim to wrap it up. Were there some standout great moments and some standout terrible moments that you wanted to talk about from the show? Max, did you have anything that you thought was particularly good or particularly bad?
I had standout
characters or particularly weird.
Let's go particularly weird first. I would say the last episode in general, just very rushed. Especially things that stood out to me were Astro Train and Omega Supreme, where they make a big deal out of their appearance. Like Prowl looks up and it's like, oh my god, his Astro Train is huge. It's this big dude. He's going to kill him or something, and he just walks off and doesn't say anything. And then you have Omega Supreme just appears out of nowhere. Good stuff.
So I feel like Astro Train is fine. I think the character's on-screen presence is commensurate with how difficult it was to acquire an Astro Train in Siege. So he's barely showing up in the toy line. So he's barely showing up in the series, and they will reissue Astro Train in Earthrise. So I think he'll have more of a part in that. As far as Omega Supreme's appearance in the final battle goes, there's a lot of questions to be raised as to how Omega Supreme, who is a giant robot, can maneuver himself to appear under this structure, presumably from solid ground. The only apparent solution for this is that Omega Supreme now moves around Cybertron like a sandworm from Dune.
Right, let's call that canon.
That's kind of an appealing notion in its own way, actually.
Yeah, in a way, right?
Imagine this sort of a big rocket transforming and then swimming around under the surface,
Weird things, good things, bad things. Keep going.
Good things were Ratchet. Obviously, he was definitely a highlight. Another weird thing was that there was an entire toy of Mirage done up for a paint deco that lasts about 30 seconds.
Yeah,
I'm expecting that to be a plot point because there is a bit of faction switching going on during a show. But no, it's just him in disguise for just half a minute. Good things. Ratchet was a definite highlight. Really enjoyed that take on a character. It's not something I've really seen before for him. This has just became one of the focal points of a show in a really solid way. That's just well written, basically. I don't have much to say other than it was a good bit of writing.
I have a sneaking suspicion that there will be a third wave of Netflix toys, and I think Ratchet will be one of them because he had a slightly different deco than his regular Siege toy. So I think if you've missed out on getting a Ratchet, you might be able to get one in the Netflix series.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I reckon he's going to be a bit of a fan favorite after that too. Other thing is Jetfire was basically like it's a plot line we've seen before many, many times across all different Transformers continuities with a variety of characters. But it was well written, and I enjoyed his arc a lot. He was one of the better acted characters on the show too. The way his sort of mannerisms slowly change over the course of a show, I thought was quite good. And he just, he just sort of provided this focal point of, and a bit of whereas the show could tend to show the Decepticons as being just you look at someone like Shockwave, right? Most of the Decepticons really were just, there's no grey area there. It's just like, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. That take on Jetfire did so that just had a little bit of grounding for the moral conflict between the two sides.
I feel like the bad guy develops a conscience is something that we've seen a lot in media in the last decade or so. I mean, obviously, there's a really big example in Star Wars with Finn, but it's something that we did see. We saw quite a bit in this. Impactor and Jetfire both voiced their concerns that they didn't think they should be seeking to obliterate the other side of the conflict that they were fighting.
Yeah, like, and it's like we were saying, it's not a very unique plotline at all. It's something that we've seen again and again and again throughout Transformers. But when it's well written, and it makes for a really enjoyable part of the show.
Yeah. Daria, any particular weird points or good or bad moments that you wanted to call out?
One weird thing that sprang to mind while you were talking about the "We Are Not the Decepticons" scene earlier is that of the two Autobots who are contemplating the "Let's kill Bumblebee so he doesn't give us away" thing, one of them's Hound.
It's almost one of the only real character moments for Hound. Hound features a lot in the show, but doesn't really seem to have a lot to do, I think.
And of course, the other weirdness, which has to come up sooner or later, is Magnus and his cloak, and who is he fooling?
Yeah, no. Look, we should talk a little bit about Ultra Magnus. Ultra Magnus is initially portrayed as betraying the Autobots, but does feed them intel about the Decepticons' plan once he is imprisoned in the Decepticon camp. Despite his apparent betrayal, after refusing to give up the location of the Autobots' ship. It doesn't really explain why he has a different paint job in the Netflix spoiler box.
Doesn't explain why there's a Netflix spoiler box.
Well, apparently there was.
Doesn't explain why spoiler box comes with rung.
Well, there was nothing underneath deluxe class in the show except for Laserbeak and Ravage. So apparently the spoiler box actually said on the outside, Ultra Magnus is dead. Was that something that we knew? Because I didn't actually realize that. I
completely missed that. If that was a thing.
Yeah, if that was actually a thing, I missed it entirely as well.
Same.
Yeah. So apparently there's some Cybertronian that we need to look at on the Wave 2 spoiler box. We'll find out. Ultra Magnus, a particularly grotesque fate. Sort of being killed, unleashing the eventually ineffective Alpha Trion protocols, which then got wiped from Bumblebee, so he doesn't know any of them. And then having his body desecrated and used to spread a virus via technobabble. But yeah, there's a couple of particularly dark shots of his body, sort of like suspended from the roof of his cell, very sort of uncomfortable, unnatural pose, bits of glowing things hanging out about him. It's almost like sort of a light bit of body horror for the Transformers franchise.
Yeah, he kind of reminded me of the Marvel version of Fortress Maximus, in that while he was kind of initially betraying his cause, he was more in pursuit of a greater cause, in that he's a bit, Autobot, Decepticon, whatever, this war has just gone on far too long. And of course he rapidly found out that, well, Megatron just wasn't into any kind of stopping the war that wasn't him obliterating everyone, so he turned back to the Autobot cause. But in that regard, you could see that character trait, which has not been part of him in some more recent portrayals of he's no longer caring about winning the war, he just wants to end the war.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it's not specifically spoken in the show, but there's a lot of desperation. I think a lot of the characters have realized that this is coming to the end of the war, and as things sort of go about in the show. And the Autobots are running out of energon. They don't have enough energon to repair their ranks and replenish them. And the Decepticons are really just sort of sick of dealing with the Autobots and just want them gone as well. The Decepticons have, as we mentioned earlier, there's a sort of somewhat IDW style backstory to the universe where the Autobots used to be the ruling party on Cybertron, and particularly mistreated, it seems, or didn't do a particularly good job of running a just and equal and fair society, and thus the Decepticons rose up and have almost completed the job of overthrowing them and conquering them. And so whether or not that makes one side more right than the other, there is a point where Megatron points out to Prime where that by planning to take the Allspark off world, he's dooming the planet. That's worse than Megatron was ever even planning to do. So does that actually make Prime worse than Megatron? There are a couple of funny things that I picked up on. I think was picked up on during the screening at our place. So as far as repaints and recolors go, Scrapface I don't think actually played a significant part of anything in the show. There just seemed to be refractor repaints everywhere. Actually, not even refractors, just a refractor army, not even repaints. So Scrapface didn't seem to do much. Decepticon Mirage was based on a 30-second joke. Impactor is actually, if I see Impactor out there, I might be inclined to grab him now. Actually, I didn't particularly care for him in Siege. When they went to visit Sound Blaster's lair in order to do the Energon heist, as they were going into the thing past the security checkpoint, they get scanned by one of the Impactor clones, who says that he's doing a weapons check, and then he lets them through. Cog literally transforms into a weapon, but passed the weapons check. So that was a bit weird. The other thing I thought was a bit weird with the plot to power the Ark by stealing all the Energon from Sound Blaster. Once they sort of went in and overpowered everyone and found the Energon reserves, there's this room with just this pile of Energon there. All they do is they pick up 2 pieces each and then run off with it. It's like it's the most modest robbery ever. Sorry, we just need some stuff to power our ship. We only need this much. We're only going to take what we need. It's like take an Energon, leave an Energon, something like that. So yeah, they made off with like 5 pieces of Energon, and that was enough to power the Ark. So if the Ark runs out of Energon sometime in Earthrise, you'll know whose fault it is.
It's like doing a bank job and holding out the bag and saying, "Put $313 into that bag."
I need precisely $313 to pay my bills this month. I'll be back next month. Yeah, so I thought that was a bit weird. I mentioned Omega Supreme showing up in the end. I thought the Optimus trying to climb the outside of the building around the space bridge, that just seemed like a computer game. That's going to be a level in the next Xbox game, right? Like it's like Super Cybertron Brothers or something. And one thing that I thought was a bit weird, when the arc was powered up, and Elita 1 gave Teletran 1 the command to sort of clear the space around them. You saw this fantastic external shot where this large anime-style sweep weapon just blasts out from the ship and rotates around and blows up everything around it, right? Like wipes out all of the Decepticons. And then as they go to take off, there's all the Decepticons standing on the ground shooting at the arc still. I was like, what did you take out? You didn't actually take out anything. Maybe they only took out all the ones that were shooting at them from above or something like that. But
I'm not even sure that beam actually clips through Astro Train as well.
Well, maybe
nothing happens.
You didn't see Astro Train again.
we saw it in that shot, and that was one of the 2 shots you see him for.
Yeah.
Around this, you also get when Red Alert falls in that pit, and Elita's like, "Red Alert, no!" And about 2 scenes later,
he landed. Yeah. He landed at the bottom of the pit, which was surprisingly not that deep.
Yeah, he's just kind of holding his side, like, "Oh, a bit sore. I'll be fine."
Yeah. The other thing I thought was interesting, this will probably play into something for the rest of the series, was the Allspark. There is of course the saying that if the Allspark is removed from Cybertron, it will kill Cybertron. Well, the Allspark was removed from Cybertron, and it didn't appear to kill it. In fact, if anything, the sunrise the following morning, as the sun rose over the battlefield, it was a brilliant, beautiful sunrise. And if anything, it seems like it's improved things on the planet.
I thought it was a metaphorical kill myself.
Don't know. Well, so, but this is sort of we're used to Cybertron being portrayed as a dead world. So yeah, maybe it is more of a metaphorical. Don't know.
Yeah, or not necessarily. Cybertron will dry up the second you take the Allspark away. But if you take the Allspark away, there'll be no new Energon. There'll be no new sparks. There'll be no new robots. There'll be no new power. So in that sense, it's going to die. Not immediately, but taking it away does kill it.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it's simply that they can't produce any new life on the planet with the Allspark being gone. That does sort of bring up the question of how they produce new life anyway.
This has always been a problem with Transformers, in a lot of versions of Transformers, in that there's often just one way to make new Transformers, and it's the Autobots have got it securely locked up, which seems remarkably unbalanced and borderline unethical.
So it is interesting on that. So just to sort of get away from Siege for a minute, James Roberts posted one of his specs for his sort of story or Bible ideas a few months ago to Twitter, sort of explaining the logic behind life being granted via the Matrix versus a cold cast, as they used to have in the old IDW universe. It was a very, very interesting read. If you can find it, do go check it out. I thought it was a really interesting read, especially sort of in context of the fact that he wrote that before he took over, before he took on some of the writing duties that he took on. But yeah, like I don't feel like this is going to be a series that really delves into that kind of thing. I feel like this is just more a case of, right, well, this is the setting that we're in, and here are the characters that we have. We're not necessarily going to, I feel like it'll be like in the G1 cartoon where like new characters pop up for the purpose of selling their toys. They may not necessarily be created or anything like that.
Yeah, we'll get to chapter 2, and there'll be, hey, it's me, Six Gun. I was standing just off camera for all the past events.
Yeah, Six Gun, also known as one of the multicolored cogs who evolved or something. I
just thought of him because it's his box propping up my camera.
Fair enough. I think as far as we'll try to sort of bring it to a close, shall we? I think overall, this show ended up way better than I feel it almost had any right to be. It was way better than I expected it to be.
Mhm.
It doesn't make it perfect. It doesn't necessarily make it amazing. And like, there's been a lot of people who are just like, oh my god, this was amazing, because it's new Transformers media. But I don't think it was necessarily amazing. I think it was good. Some parts of it tended towards great, but I think that's probably where I draw the line. Like, I'd probably give it maybe 3.5, maybe sometime approaching 4 out of 5. But it's definitely not that close to perfection. How about you guys?
I would put it on the higher tier of Transformers cartoons. I have my fair share of issues with it, to be sure, but largely just and it's nothing particularly remarkable, but as just an enjoyable 2.5 hours of show, it's a really good time. It's a solid story, and it's reasonably well acted. A lot of the characters are really likable and engaging, and the animation is just gorgeous. Obviously, I've got my fair share of issues with the show, but and it's far from perfect. It's not particularly remarkable, but I can't say I would ever call it a bad show. I think it was genuinely pretty solid.
And I think I agree. I mean, I think a lot of us were fearing another go to the same world that gave us Combiner Wars, and this is definitely not that. I enjoyed it. There's room for improvement, to be sure, and we've just spent an hour and a bit talking about that very thing. But I enjoyed it. I'm eager for Chapter 2. I enjoyed looking at it and listening to it. I was thinking about it afterwards. So it prompted the sort of speculative thought space that usually means I've liked something that I'm prepared to wonder about it afterwards. So I think in that sense, it's done its job. I think I also think it had a little bit to live up to being the sort of high-end animation 6 episodes that we waited 2 years for product, and that might color some people's views, but I think in and of itself, job done.
All right, I think that might do it for this week. We do have a little bit of news that we might regroup on Friday and talk about. We'll see how we go. So we've spent the last hour talking about the new War for Cybertron series that has hit Netflix worldwide. It is a 6-episode season. It did say at the end that chapters 2 and 3 are coming, so that's pretty much a 3-season show. Whether they're 6 episodes or not, we'll find out soon. Well, probably not that soon. You can, of course, find it on Netflix. And you can find all of us in the Transformers Collectors Club Australia group on Facebook. We are a production of TCCA, a non-profit club registered in Victoria, in the lovely COVID-ridden state of Victoria in Australia. Please do. I don't know. I feel like I should just say like and subscribe at the end of the videos now or something. Anyway, we are a weekly production. If you are watching us, as a couple of people have been while we've been recording, please do come and chat with us. The discussion group on Facebook will have its spoiler moratorium lifted in about an hour and a half at the time of recording. So as of Sunday morning, everyone's free to post spoilers and discussion threads as they see fit. Do enjoy the show, and do come by the Transformers Collectors Club Australia group on Facebook if you are not already in there, and tell us what you thought of the show. We might try to collect a few listener reactions and maybe do something more on the show in the coming weeks. We'll see how we go. All right. That is about it. And we will see you in another week or so's time. Goodbye.
Night, y'all.
Catch you next week.
Oh, wait.